In the ashes of the Great War, Europe stood broken, the guns had fallen silent, but the peace that followed was fragile, built on bitterness and blame. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was meant to secure a lasting order. Instead, it sowed the seeds of the next catastrophe. Germany was humiliated, its borders redrawn, its army reduced to a shadow, its people crushed by reparations. The proud empire of the Kaiser was gone, replaced by the fragile Weimar Republic, a democracy born. In defeat, inflation devoured the German mark, a loaf of bread could cost a wheelbarrow of money. In the streets of Berlin, chaos reigned, communists clashed with fascists, veterans marched in despair. And faith in democracy began to die. Into this world stepped a failed artist, a soldier of the Great War, Adolf Hitler. In the beer halls of Munich, he discovered the power of words. He promised revival, unity, revenge. He told a wounded nation that it was not defeated, only betrayed, and for millions humiliated by Versailles, his rage became their own. The 1920s brought brief hope. Europe tried to rebuild. France recovered, Britain withdrew into its empire, and America, rich and distant, turned away. But beneath the surface, resentment and fear smoldered. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, the world's fragile balance collapsed again, factories closed, banks failed. Millions were thrown into poverty. In Germany, despair returned, and with it, Hitler's opportunity. By 1933, the man once dismissed as a fanatic had become Chancellor of Germany. Within months, he dismantled the republic and built a dictatorship. The Reichstag fire gave him his pretext. Opponents were silenced, newspapers censored, unions crushed. Germany became a nation marching in lockstep, its people drawn into the rhythm of banners and drums. But Hitler's ambitions went far beyond his own country. He dreamed of a new empire, a 1,000-year Reich. And he was not alone. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had already shown that dictatorship could thrive under the banner of nationalism. In Japan, generals dreamed of dominion across Asia. The age of the strongmen had returned. By the mid-1930s, the League of Nations, created to preserve peace, was powerless. When Italy invaded Ethiopia, the world protested but did nothing. When Germany rearmed, violating every clause of Versailles, no one stopped it. When Hitler marched troops into the demilitarized Rhineland in 1936, even his generals feared disaster. But France and Britain, weary of war, stayed still. Their inaction told him everything he needed to know. Europe's democracies wanted peace, at any price. But Hitler understood that peace could be broken if one simply refused to believe in it. He watched, waited, tested the limits. The Anschluss of Austria in 1938 brought his first triumph. German troops were greeted with flowers. Next came Czechoslovakia, dismembered at Munich with the consent of Britain and France. The West believed they had saved peace. Hitler knew they had surrendered it. By the summer of 1939, the storm was inevitable. Germany had rebuilt its armies, trained its pilots, forged its tanks. The Wehrmacht was ready. Across Europe, people hoped, some prayed, that diplomacy would still prevail. But in Berlin, Hitler's mind was already set. He would strike east, destroy Poland, and redraw the map of Europe by force. To his generals, he said simply, only conquest will bring Germany greatness again. And as August waned, Europe stood on the brink once more, a continent haunted by the ghosts of the last war, and blind to the horror that was about to begin. In the summer of 1939, as Europe held its breath, two great powers moved quietly toward a moment that would shock the world. Germany and the Soviet Union, sworn enemies in ideology, now found themselves drawn together by calculation, ambition, and fear. Across the continent, diplomats and spies whispered of a mysterious agreement, a secret understanding between the Red Star and the Iron Cross. Yet few could imagine the scale of what was coming. Germany had long planned its expansion eastward, the Lebensraum, the living space promised by Hitler in his fiery speeches. But to strike Poland meant risking a two-front war, the same trap that had destroyed the Kaiser's armies in 1918. For Hitler to move, he needed one thing, the silence of the East. In Moscow, Joseph Stalin watched events unfold with his usual cold patience. He distrusted Hitler, yet he distrusted the Western powers even more. Britain and France, hesitant and divided, had failed to build a united front against the German threat. To Stalin, the democracies seemed weak, indecisive, unwilling to fight for Poland or anyone else, and so, the Soviet leader turned to the unthinkable, a pact with his ideological foe. On the night of August 23, 1939, under the chandeliers of the Kremlin, the German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop met with Soviet Premier Vyacheslav Molotov. Stalin himself appeared, smiling, courteous, calculating. Around them, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of history. In that room, the fate of nations was redrawn like ink lines on a map. The public document, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, proclaimed a simple promise of peace between Germany and the Soviet Union. The world saw a gesture of diplomacy. But hidden within, in a secret protocol known only to a handful of men, lay a far darker truth, the partition of Eastern Europe. Poland would be divided. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, would fall into Soviet hands. Bessarabia, taken from Russia after the Great War, would be reclaimed. It was not peace they had signed that night, but the quiet consent to destroy nations. For Hitler, the pact was liberation. Now, with his eastern flank secure, he could unleash his armies without fear of Soviet intervention. He called it a guarantee of success. For Stalin, it was time to rebuild his strength, to watch Europe bleed while the Red Army prepared for the next chapter. Both men believed they were outsmarting the other. Both believed time was on their side. In Berlin, church bells rang and newspapers proclaimed the triumph of German diplomacy. Few understood the price of that triumph. In Warsaw, fear spread like wildfire. The Polish government, already encircled, now faced the impossible, to resist Germany in the west, and potentially the Soviet Union in the east. In London and Paris, the pact was received with disbelief and fury. How could Stalin, the man who preached the defense of the working class, ally himself with Hitler, the sworn enemy of communism? But outrage came too late. Europe was sliding toward catastrophe, and the men who could have stopped it were paralyzed by fear and indecision. By the final week of August, German divisions were already massing on the Polish frontier. Orders were written, maps were marked, and soldiers prepared to move. In Moscow, Soviet generals received coded messages to stand ready. In both capitals, the clocks ticked toward war. The deal was done. The shadow had fallen. On August 25, a faint flicker of hesitation appeared. Britain announced a formal alliance with Poland. For a brief moment, Hitler hesitated, delaying the invasion by mere days. But the die had already been cast. The world did not yet know it, but the secret signed in that dim Kremlin chamber would ignite the bloodiest conflict in human history. The pact had no soul, no morality, no permanence. It was born of cynicism and fear, a marriage of convenience between two predators circling the same prey. And like all pacts of darkness, it would not last, but for now, it served its purpose. In the last days of August 1939, under a sky heavy with storm clouds, Europe stood silent. The ink on the treaty was barely dry when the first guns began to move, and soon, the world would burn. The Blitzkrieg unleashed, September 1, 1939, dawn breaks over Europe, but it is not peace that greets the morning, it is the thunder of guns. At 4:45 a.m., on the first day of September, 1939, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opens fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. The first shells of a new world war scream across the Baltic air. For months, Europe had lived under tension, rumors, promises, false smiles in diplomatic halls. But now, the mask is gone. Germany has struck. The war that would consume the world has begun. In the early light, German divisions surge across the border. Nearly 1.5 million men, 2,000 tanks, and over 1,000 aircraft pour into Poland from the west. North and south, the strategy is new, terrifyingly new. The Germans call it Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. A fusion of speed, precision, and shock. the sky is filled with the roar of Stuka dive bombers, their sirens wailing like mechanical banshees as they plunge toward Polish columns. Roads are torn apart by explosions. Communication lines are cut. Panic spreads faster than orders can be given. Polish soldiers, brave but outmatched, fight desperately. Cavalry units charge against armored vehicles, not out of ignorance, but out of defiance. The old world's courage meets the new world's machinery. Warsaw, the proud capital, becomes a city under siege. German bombers rain destruction from above. Hospitals, homes, train stations all vanish beneath falling steel. Civilians crowd in basements, clutching what they can save, listening as the city trembles. Yet Poland does not yield easily. From the first hour, resistance is fierce. In the forests, the fields, and the narrow streets, men and women fight on, hoping, praying, that Britain and France will come. Across the Channel, on September 3, Britain and France declare war on Germany. But their armies do not move. For Poland, help remains a promise on paper. The Allies, cautious and unprepared, wait behind their fortified lines, watching as the storm devours the east. Meanwhile, from the opposite frontier, another shadow falls. On September 17, 1939, Soviet troops cross into eastern Poland, executing their part of the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Poland is crushed between two giants, divided before the world can even comprehend what has happened. By early October, the campaign is over. In barely 5 weeks, the Polish army has been defeated. The world stands stunned. No nation in modern history has fallen so swiftly. The Blitzkrieg has proven itself to be a weapon of terror and efficiency. Europe watches in silence. France and Britain stand officially at war, yet the Western Front remains still. The newspapers call it the phony war. But the truth is clear, something new has entered history. A war not of trenches, but of movement. Not of attrition, but annihilation. The world had watched, and waited, when Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war. But declarations are only words. And words cannot stop tanks. For weeks, the people of Poland fought alone. Across the Western Front, the guns were silent. British and French soldiers waited behind the Maginot Line, a wall of steel and confidence, while, in the east, Poland was burning. The German Blitzkrieg moved with terrifying speed. In less than 10 days, Polish defenses along the Vistula were shattered. Armored divisions swept through the countryside, cutting off retreating units, surrounding entire armies. Communication collapsed. Airfields were destroyed. And from the skies, the Luftwaffe ruled without challenge. Warsaw became the heart of resistance, and the symbol of tragedy. By mid-September, the capital was encircled. German artillery and bombers pounded the city day and night. The sound of explosions merged with the cries of the wounded. Fire consumed entire districts, yet still, the city held. Civilians dug trenches, soldiers defended house to house. Radio Warsaw broadcasted pleas to the world, desperate, defiant, we shall fight to the end. Poland is not yet lost. But the world was silent. On September 17, from the east, came another blow. Soviet forces crossed the border, fulfilling the secret pact signed weeks earlier, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement. Poland, already bleeding, was struck from behind. For many Polish soldiers, it was the final betrayal. They now faced two empires, one wearing the swastika, the other the Red Star. There could be no victory, only survival. The Polish government fled south toward Romania, hoping to continue the struggle from abroad. In the forests, small groups of soldiers refused to surrender. They would become the first of the partisans, the resistance that would never die. By September 27, after weeks of bombardment, Warsaw finally surrendered. When German troops entered the city, it was little more than ashes and rubble. Tens of thousands lay dead. The campaign was over. In just 36 days, Europe stood in shock. Never before had a nation fallen so quickly, so completely. The speed, the coordination, the violence, it was something new, something horrifying. The lightning war had proven unstoppable. In Berlin, Hitler celebrated. In Moscow, Stalin watched and waited. The two dictators had divided Poland between them, their armies meeting along the Bug River. For the first time in centuries, Poland ceased to exist, yet among the ruins, a spirit endured. Thousands of Polish soldiers escaped through Hungary and France to join the Allied forces. Others stayed behind, forming underground networks that would resist occupation for years to come. The struggle for Poland was not over. It had only changed shape, from open battle to silent defiance. As autumn settled over Europe, a strange quiet followed. Britain and France were now officially at war with Germany, but there were no major battles, no invasions, no victories. The newspapers called it the phony war. Behind the calm, both sides prepared for something far greater. The storm had passed over Poland, and was now gathering over the West. The world had seen the first act of the new war. The next would decide the fate of Europe itself.